Happy March. How was everyone? Tired, yeah. What was that?
Could be better.
Could be better, could be worse. Tired, yeah. And I'm with you all, right? We're at that like literal halfway point of the semester. And so it seems like right about now, everyone starts to kind of feel a little worn down. Spring break is like still a ways off. Like ours is that first week of April. So it's kind of late. It's like after Easter. My kids get the week before off. And then we get that one like that's after. We never have the same spring break, which is always a little obnoxious, but whatever. I know, and then other people are on break now. I'm like, that's not fair. Right? I'm sure we're all ready for break. And it's coming, but it's still a little ways off. So hang in there. I'm with you. I'm like aggressively counting down till I don't have to like do anything and I'm going on a cruise. Yeah. That helps. Nice. Yeah, that first 8 week, those if you took 8 week classes, yeah, they ended on Friday. Yeah. I love the 8 week classes. I don't know how all of you feel about them, but I like them. Nice. I had two that ended on Friday and two that started today. So I'm in the same spot, but like it's nice when they're done. It's nice to get them out of the way. So we will finish up with this chapter, chapter 11. We don't have a lot left, but just to kind of wrap up chapter 11, and then we'll move on from there. But we spent a lot of time last time talking about, coming out and the idea of passing and coming out of the closet and so on. I hope you thought the activity was kind of interesting where you couldn't talk about those things. Again, that's something that a lot of people, have to deal with. How out are they to everyone? Are they having to pass or kind of present that false image of being heterosexual? So definitely kind of a big part of in terms of lifestyle and comfort and how people are able to live their life. The last piece of this chapter is just to give a few moments here specifically to bisexuality. So we've been talking about bisexuality throughout as one of the like orientations, but I want to just talk about it for a couple of minutes on its own. The way that we tend to define bisexuality is people who can enjoy and engage in sexual activities with members of both sexes, or they at least recognize the desire to do so. Right. So maybe not actively, but it is like you have an interest in both sexes or either sex. And that is traditionally how we define like bisexuality. The book talks about 3 different types of bisexuality. And this is a little bit controversial, but let's talk about them anyway. That people can have sequential, contemporaneous, or situational like homosexuality. Right, 3 different ways that this can kind of manifest. And again, it feels like they're kind of like shove it into that box here by defining a type. But when it's sequential, it's when people engage in sexual behavior exclusively with one person, a member of one sex, followed by exclusively with a member of the other sex. So being bisexual as manifesting as like you're with women in a woman in a relationship, and then you're with a man in a relationship, right? They happen in like a sequence, but they're separate. Contemporaneous would be when you have partners of both sexes during the same period of time. And then situational might be due to a lack of partners, right? So maybe you're in a situation like an all girl or all boy school, or you're in the military and there aren't a lot of like, whatever it is, there aren't the partners that you would necessarily want. So you kind of deal with that by like having situational episodes of like what we could term like homosexuality. So there's a lot of like misunderstanding about bisexuality. A lot of theories thinking that we are all born bisexual to some degree. Kinsey believed that really firmly, that we're all born bisexual and that we kind of choose and are shaped by our experiences. But there's a lot of like struggles and discrimination that can come here as well. A lot of like widespread misunderstanding. I want you to take just a moment, find a couple of people around you, and you could jot it down so you don't forget. It might not be a lot, but what are some like stereotypes or like portrayals that you see a lot of people who identify as bisexual? See if you can come up with any, write them down, and we can talk about them together. But any kind of like stereotypes or maybe like discrimination that people who identify this way might face that's different. See if you can come up with anything, find a few people, and then we'll talk about it together. Just whatever's convenient, like 2, 3, 4 people. Mhm.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Just yeah. Yeah. And then I just. I didn't know that was on. And some. Oh, no. Oh. Yeah.
All right, let's go and see what you came up with. I heard a few things, like quickly, but what are some of the thoughts that you had? Anyone have any like stereotypes or things you came up with? Yeah.
It's really common to me, because we've been on like gay and straight, it's commonly treated as a phase.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't like, go to one side of it.
Right. Oh, totally. Oh, it's a phase. You'll make up your mind eventually, right? Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Yeah.
I've heard like, oh, you're just confused, you don't know what you want.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. They're kind of the same idea, but yeah, you're confused. Yeah.
I wrote a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, if you're with a guy, then you're gonna cheat on me, the girl, and I'm like. That's not how it works.
Yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes around like cheating and inability to be monogamous, right? If you can't be in a relationship with one person, that's a very common stereotype. Yeah.
One theory I've heard is that, many people kind of believe that if you still like the opposite gender,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, no, you're not really bisexual, you're straight.
Mhm.
Like, you still like men if you're female. Or you
Sure.
Still like men if you're female and you're men. And it's like, they kind of ignore the fact that, you know, there's still attraction for the same sex.
Okay.
Focus on that.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. Anybody have anything else? Anything else that you came up with? Yeah. Mhm.
But she came out as bi and while she's in there,
Okay,
so I can see a lot of stereotypes. Like, oh, y'all be married. Not as bi.
right. Okay, you're with this one person that's, you know,
That you
you
really,
get.
like,
Mhm.
I just thought that was.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, anything else? Yeah, sorry. Please.
Instead of like, if it's not really cool, then it's like fetishization.
Okay.
So if they're like, oh yeah, I'm bisexual or I'm pansexual, like, oh, so have you done it with so and so or what is it like? Or they just assume that you're a hypersexual person,
Yeah,
which is not always true.
right.
If you don't say that, then we're like, oh, you're making it up. So it's like,
Yeah, that hypersexuality, lack of commitment, and all the things that you're mentioning is a really common stereotypes. There's also a level of invisibility that can come. Right, so oftentimes when people are gay or lesbian, like there might be like clubs or organizations that they feel like they can join in. Maybe it's a little more visible. Bisexuality sometimes is invisible in some ways, right? You might not have as much of a community in some ways to like you know, bandwidth. So there's a lot of misunderstanding and stereotypes and discrimination. That it's trendy is another one that's really, really common, that it's just like a trend, or it's something like for other people's enjoyment. But the ones that I see the most are just like that you aren't able to be monogamous. You just want to have sex with everyone and anyone all the time, right? Which could be true, but it's not, you know, any more true than anything else, right? It's a stereotype, which we sometimes see being portrayed. So even though we talk about different types, right? Again, we don't necessarily have to pigeonhole into a type, but bisexuality, just wanted to take a minute to kind of focus on that on its own, because it can have its own unique issues and struggles and so on. Anything else related to orientation or anything else with this chapter at all before we leave it behind? Anything else with anything here? Yeah.
Kind of ignorant question I'm almost embarrassed to ask, but I understand that bisexuality is being attracted to someone of any gender.
Mm-hmm.
And when pansexuality is being attracted to someone regardless of gender. What is the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality?
Yeah, so the way that I've always seen this portrayed is, so someone who is bisexual can be attracted to men and or women, right? So they can be attracted to men, they can be attracted to women. And then pansexuality is more, you're attracted to the person regardless of their gender. So their gender doesn't necessarily matter, gender or sex. So it's more that you are interested or attracted to the person for who they are, rather than having anything to do with their sex or gender. I mean, you could argue in some ways that they're the same, and then you could obviously argue that they're different, but that's the distinction that's usually made, that one is like men and or women, and the other is like, well, I don't even care about the labels, it's just the person, if that makes sense. Yeah. Sure, I had to think about that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, you can identify in any way that you want, right? So if somebody is non-binary and so they don't conform to being like male or female or like masculine or feminine, and you're attracted to them, yeah, you could still call yourself bisexual, or you could call yourself pansexual. I mean, it's tricky. Ultimately, your sexuality is what you say it is, right? But if we desperately want to give it a label, yes, I mean, you could still call it, I think you could call it either, depending on your preference. Right? Yeah.
Like just doing like own personal research, like trying to figure out what I was.
Yeah.
I found like what I came to the understanding was like bisexuality, just like preference for gender, basically, where it's like multiple genders with preference for like certain ones, and then when it comes to pansexuality, it's like regardless of preference, it's just the individual.
Yeah, it's just the person, right? Yeah. And again, I think you could easily argue in some ways how they're the same. But they're different. Yeah.
I don't know how many people, but.
Yeah, and then I was talking to somebody about sexuality over the weekend, and they were like, "I'm sexually queer," and I was like, "Okay, I'm not sure what that means. So you have to tell me what that means." And like it came out of nowhere. It was so random. It's like a softball like friend of mine for my kids, and we were talking about this, and somebody had a tattoo of like a pink triangle, which is oftentimes the symbol for like bisexuality and some of the like gay, lesbian, bisexual movements. And she's all like, I would never put a pink triangle on me because I'm sexually queer. And I was like, so I'm like, so you're interested in what? And she's like, I don't know, everyone and anything, and I'm not going to define it. I'm sexually queer. It's like, okay, okay, right? Like, so I mean, I think it's just people, it's whatever you want to call yourself in all fairness and honesty. But we do have all these labels to try and like talk about it and research it and understand it. But yeah, it's ultimately whatever you're comfortable. All right, let's go to our next things. Did I hit? Yes, okay. So our next chapter is chapter 3 on communication. I think this is a really interesting chapter because there's so many stereotypes and like really interesting things that tend to like relate to this topic. So we'll look at, what is communication, but we're going to talk a lot about gendered communication and a lot of stereotypes in this chapter, which may or may not be true. But they're often true of some people, which is where they come from. But we'll look a little bit at like the importance of communication, differences, and then some communication patterns in kind of more unsuccessful relationships as well. And I have lots of video clips and examples of this. I had to narrow it down because there were so many, but I have quite a few. But when we're communicating, we are trying to convey meaningful information to someone. So we're trying to either verbally or non-verbally or both convey something new. And that's kind of the essence of communication. And we do a lot of it non-verbally. Right? We can obviously tell somebody what we're thinking, what we're feeling, what's going on, and say all those things. But you can tell so much about somebody's mood, their comfort, and all sorts of other things based on non-verbal communication. Right? Nonverbal communication is like communicating without words, right? Eye contact, head nodding, touching, how close you stand to someone or how far away you stand from someone. Body language fills in a ton of gaps in verbal communication. So we'll not only focus on like the verbal stuff, but also, and maybe even more, the nonverbal stuff. And communication plays a really, really big role in relationship happiness. If you can communicate well with a partner and navigate your way through arguments and fights and differences and so on, right, that tends to have a really strong correlation with that relationship lasting. It's okay to fight with a partner, right? It might not seem like it, and people have different levels of comfort with fighting, but fighting is okay. It's how you work your way through it and move on from it and make adjustments and so on. So nonverbal and verbal communication, really important for relationship satisfaction. I was looking this up and I found all these images and I just wanted to share them with you because I think they all like speak so interestingly, right? So, right, like one versus the other, right? And so like how much you can tell based on nonverbal stuff, right? Like smiling, touching each other versus backs to each other and arms crossed, right? Just communicating so much without saying anything, right? Open, happy, facing each other, smiling versus like eye rolling and contempt. There's so many of these. Here, I found 4 more, right? I limited myself to 8, right? Sitting next to each other on the couch. He has her arm behind her and kind of around her versus at opposite ends of the couch. This one is so fascinating as a couples therapist. You look a lot at how do they sit with each other in the room? Are they holding hands? If there's a couch and 2 chairs, did they pick the couch or the chairs, right? Like, how do they sit? Where do they sit? What's their body language looking like? Again, like open and smiling versus like eye rolling and contempt, right? Again, there's so many of these, but we can see so many things being conveyed in this way. And have you ever had somebody, like, I love people watching, this is, I guess, kind of a form of people watching. Have you ever had somebody like walking up to you and you can tell what mood they're in before they even open their mouth? Right? That's like the nonverbal stuff, right? I like to watch couples on dates at restaurants and like guess how it's going based on the nonverbal stuff, right? Because like I, obviously don't want to be like creepy and be like listening in, but like whenever we go out to eat as a family, which is a decent amount of the time, I'm always like watching the couples, like trying to guess how long they've been together, how happy they are on a scale of 1 to 10. I don't know. But it's really interesting to watch people. You can tell so much just based off of body language. Are they holding hands and smiling? Are they closed off? Right. And not only in relationships, but in friendships and in just any kind of people that we have in our lives, the nonverbal stuff really speaks volumes. So it's kind of a combination of both what we say and everything else, which we could call nonverbal communication. There are a couple of people who have very much advanced the whole like male versus female communication patterns. And as I mentioned, this is riddled with stereotypes, and some of them are true and some of them aren't. But we'll talk about this idea of like gender-lect and gendered dialogue, that men and women, and again, we're assuming and like putting people into boxes here, but that men and women communicate very differently, stereotypically. And I have these two books. These are the two people we're going to talk about in two like kind of famous like books related to this. I'll hand them around if you want to take a look at them. They're both very easy and interesting reads. Probably stuff a lot of us can relate to as we read them. But they're both coming at this idea of gender-left, that men and women communicate in fundamentally different ways. And I have an example of this. I was watching Wednesday with my daughter over the weekend, and there was such a great example in it. And I was like, oh, I need to remember that. And I did. But there's an example of gendered communication. And I'm just gonna play this for you. It's brief, right? But it's Enid and I just forgot his name, Ajax, right? And they're having this